Today we're going to be talking about LGBTQ mental health during Pride Month. And this is also Pride Month for NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And so I'm very excited to have a wonderful panel. We have Naomi Green. She's an African-American woman of trans experience whose mission is to provide insight about what is needed to improve the lives of transgender women and their families. She is the transgender program manager at Abounding Prosperity. Please wave, Naomi. Next to Naomi is Raymond Castileja Jr. He is the Behavioral Health Director at PrismHealth North Texas, which provides integrated health care to those living with and at high risk for HIV in the region. And then we have Allison Johnson, the Community Programs Manager for Resource Center, and she is over youth, women, and older adult programming, helping with support and resources for everyone. So thank you for joining us. And then we have Sharyn Fein, who's Executive Director of EDUCARE, which is a nonprofit organization that teaches compassion for all and addresses the unique needs of those in marginalized communities, especially older adults of the LGBTQ community. She is also the past chair of the Senior Affairs Commission of Greater Dallas. So welcome everybody. I'm very excited that we're having this panel today, and some of the questions may seem that they fit one person or the other, but I want everyone to have a chance to chime in when it seems appropriate and you have some information that we need. So just some statistics. LGBTQ adults, or I'm going to call them Pride adults for Pride Month, and it's easier to get off the tongue, are more than twice as likely as heterosexual adults to experience a mental health condition. And now we're talking 1 in 5 adults every year have a mental health condition, and double that if you're in the Pride community. So also, we in the Pride community are at higher risk for suicidal thoughts and suicide attempts. We're also, high school students are 5 times as likely to attempt suicide or think about it than their heterosexual classmates. And 48% of all transgender adults report they have considered suicide in the past 12 months, compared to 4% of the general population. So we're talking about the Pride population needing mental health care more than the heterosexual population, but in truth doesn't access it nearly enough. So I'm gonna go into basically, Naomi, do you wanna just say a few words about the trans community and how we can help the trans community get the help they need and lower this suicide rate? Would you ask to unmute, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if you all know, but being trans is almost a marginalization on top of a marginalization. You would think that being a transgender person, you would have the support of other people in the LGBTQ plus IA community or LGBTQIA plus community. However, what I have experienced is that there seems to be somewhat of a divide, and trans people are at a greater risk of discrimination, especially when it comes to employment, housing, I mean, even healthcare, you know, with the executive order that Donald Trump just recently implemented. So there are a lot of things that go into being trans. And trans people are at an even greater risk of suicide and things like that than other members in the LGBTQIA plus community, or pride community, as you say. And so just looking at the statistics, is very alarming. And I know that one of the reasons also is because of social isolation. Being trans, because of the lack of acceptance in society, a lot of the times trans people have to isolate themselves, which is very unhealthy. It's very similar to the aging population of the pride community, which is one of the concerns with aging, is some of the social isolation that goes along with that. And things can start to happen, especially when it comes to your mental health, when you're not a part of a social community. And because of the social isolation that many trans people have to do sometimes in order to feel safe, to be safe, to not have to deal with some of the discrimination and things like that from other members of society, it is very unhealthy. And when you start to add additional marginalized populations like Black and brown trans people and things like that, it gets even higher, which, is the reason why, trans women of color have a life expectancy of only around 35 years old. So there is definitely a huge importance when you talk about mental health, and being able to access mental health for all trans people is very important as well. Because, you have some trans people who have a certain level of privilege, and then you also have some trans people who lack privilege, especially those of color. And so it's really up to mental health providers to reach out sometimes, or just make themselves known and available, and be as affirming as possible. Because sometimes you go into these sessions, and as a trans person, for you to sit down or for you to be in a lobby or an office and get misgendered, to get certain looks and things like that, that kind of adds to the stigma that you already feel and experience as a trans person. And it makes you just shy away and not even want to deal with trying to take care of your mental health aspects. And so it is very important and imperative for people, especially trans people, to get mental health, to seek mental health, because there are a lot of different changes that your body goes through when you're transitioning, and they're not all just physical. Some of them are mental, and sometimes you need someone professionally to talk you through some of those different changes. And so, yeah, it's very, very important, because the suicide rate amongst trans people is even higher and even more alarming.
Thank you. Raymond, I'd love for you to comment on how a counseling center can make sure that, even though this is, PRISM is a Pride counseling center, to make sure that the counselors understand better the trans experience and don't accidentally stigmatize the client who's come to them for their help.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Naomi, for sharing your story. Absolutely. Definitely, at PrismHealth North Texas, we have integrated care. So our behavioral health program is for our patients who are seeing medication for HIV, medication for PrEP services. We train our therapists to be culturally competent, understand trauma, understand different experiences. We hire people from the community who are transgender, just to be able to understand. We're going to also create a trans support group, because we understand that they're exactly what Naomi was talking about: high suicide rates, the lack of support. Our therapists are trained in the gender asset test, so we're able to ask the appropriate questions. In our centers, we ask pronouns. We want to make sure that we're taking care of our patients and making sure they feel at home, and really create a trauma-informed setting that they feel welcomed and understand that they are, they're welcome here, they're part of the community.
Thank you. I know that's very important, and I know that when we're talking about either mental health or HIV, we are talking about a lot of the same people, the same therapists, and how important it is that we use our language correctly, and that we also, unfortunately, our community has a stigmatizing way to ones who are not like us. And I have seen uh, young gay men, stigmatize transgender people because they're different, and because maybe they feel superior for a moment over somebody when they're so afraid that someone's going to find out about them or whatever. And I can say I'm so glad that in today's age that shouldn't be happening, because back when I was coming out, there were two known gay therapists in Dallas, and one of them was Howie Dare, who I went to, and he pretty much saved my life because I thought I was the only person in the world who was gay. And uh, so to have this plethora of knowledgeable, not only therapists but resources, is so great to have at our fingertips here. And Allison, do you want to talk some about the great resources that Resource Center has, and how y'all are especially working with teens?
Sure. So thank you, John. As you mentioned, I am the Community Programs Manager at Resource Center, which is one of the primary LGBTQ organizations and HIV organizations in North Texas. And we have a really dynamic youth program called Youth First that serves LGBTQ youth ages 12 through 18. The majority of those participants are trans youth. And if they I learned to identify that they are trans youth while in the program, just by having that peer exposure to others in the community. Ways that we support the trans youth community are by having we have a gender identity support group every Tuesday night. It's run specifically by community mentors and Youth First staff that are a part of the trans community, and which is really important, I think. So taking a step back from Resource Center for a second, it's important to not only just be aware that the trans community exists in the LGBT community, but also make an effort to have trans individuals on your staff, and have individuals that are directly consulting with these policies and procedures that are being put in place. For example, as a non-binary person myself, being able to connect with the youth at Youth First and understand the trans experience on a personal level is really important. But back to our programming. So we have our gender identity night where youth can come and they can be in that safe space and talk about their experience with gender. We also have a suicide prevention group, and understanding the importance of creating an even safer space for queer youth of color to be able to talk about the challenges that they face due to intersectionality, and being an LGBTQ young person of color, and the unique challenges that brings to the table. So we have our Queer Youth of Color program as well, that's specifically and exclusively facilitated by LGBTQ individuals of color in the community. So bringing together these opportunities for the youth to have these safe spaces is really important. But it goes beyond that. Also, social programming, things that we don't think about, is kids need the opportunity to be amongst other LGBTQ individuals, just to do things that you would normally experience in your youth. Be able to go to your prom, to be able to go on a field trip to a cultural place like a museum. LGBTQ youth tend to isolate themselves from these opportunities. They're not going to participate in them in school because they're unsafe or unwelcome. So creating social opportunities for LGBTQ youth as well is very important, especially for trans youth, where they can talk about these things and have open and honest conversations about stuff that they're not going to hear otherwise. Even down to being in school, you're not going to hear sex education that's appropriate for the LGBT community. Health class, you're not going to talk about trans bodies in health class, and be able to talk about that in an open and honest way. So being able to just have a community where queer youth can be around other queer youth, it opens the opportunity for this robust discussion and friendships and networking that goes a long way in decreasing that social isolation and increasing the mental health of our youth.
Thank you. I'm going to flip over to Sharyn now. And Sharyn works with an organization, EDUCARE, which works a lot with older Pride members. And we find that a lot of times that socialization is harder as the years go by, especially when someone loses their partner and they don't have the same amount of help that a straight couple gets when they lose their partner in a, say, 60 plus age. And so Sharyn, you want to talk a little bit about how EDUCARE is not only working with that, but working in other ways through the systems? Sharyn, unmute yourself here.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think that our greatest concern today, and especially in Dallas and surrounding counties, is what happens to couples that are faced with the situation where they need to move out of their homes, and then they are looking for community living and a lifestyle that's comfortable for them. And we run very frequently into the problem of integrating communities together without the proper training and understanding of what unique needs are in marginalized communities, which causes depression, anxiety, and suicide. We have had multiple contacts from people who are going back into the closet to get into a living community so that they are not living in fear. So what EDUCARE does is receive phone calls from family and friends, and we will actually go into the communities and work with the person who is feeling isolated, because that is a form of isolation. And then we'll take it to executive directors and offer cultural competency training. Often we find that it's not necessarily the staff that needs the training, it's the allies that are living in the communities with integrating people who are holding on to a lot of prejudices, which causes anxiety. We recently worked with a lovely gentleman in a living community that had employees that were a member of the Pride community. However, when he first stepped into the property, he stepped in as a straight man because he was afraid, and he lived a straight man's life for many years, but then found the love of his life after that, but was afraid to discuss it. And he lived in the closet, and he was very, very unhappy and very sad. We went in with one of my wonderful board members, John Steele, who's our chair of the education department, and we talked to him and we said, how can we help you or assist you? And he said, I welcome you to, and then we took it further. And we've had a lot of experience like that. So our fear is anxiety, depression, going back into the closet. So we have a cultural competency training. We do it, on an individual basis. And then last January, we held a seminar called Becoming Visible, which was a rainbow event. And I say rainbow by EDUCARE's board is not an ally board, but a human board of the rainbow of people, including allies. So our goal is to work cohesively together to make aging safe for everyone, especially communities that are not comfortable yet in Dallas.
Now, I'm going to throw this question out to whoever wants to have the gumption to grab it. And it's basically looking at our Pride community and talking about people of color and people not of color, and how that affects you and your mental health compared to the straight community. As far as, do we see that we're more similar to each other, or do we see that that addition of being gay, lesbian, trans, etc., pushes us farther apart from each other?
I will, for the sake of grabbing onto your conversation, I'll go ahead and jump in there and do my best to understand the entire complexity of the conversation. But when talking about that intersectionality, one, I would like to point out that it's important when we're making these comparisons, not just that we're comparing the LGBT community to the straight community, but also the cisgender community as well. Understanding that sexual orientation and gender identity are not the same thing. But I do think that intersectionality comes in a lot, like what Naomi was talking about. It's very important to have these safe spaces and to have these community, but we see it even as a privileged member of the LGBT community, being able to walk down Cedar Springs or during a time that we're not socially isolating, to be in our affectionately named neighborhood, right? And to be able to visit these areas, even those areas and sectors of our community are not always represented as places that feel safe for all members of the LGBTQ community. The trans community and a lot of times the Black and Brown trans individuals are not represented and feeling safe in these designated safe areas of Dallas. So I think that there's just, to say that we're all the same, I think would do a disservice to needing to understand the different cultural experiences that are happening within our community, and to really highlight that and to dive in deeper into how different members of the community are experiencing those things that do connect us, but are experienced in different ways. I'm not sure I answered your question, John, but just thought I'd throw that in.
Well, it was lovely, no matter if you answered or not, I'm not even sure.
Yeah, I'll jump in as well. Definitely as a member of the gay community, there is a difference in a sense because, you're brought up in this society of watching everything as there's marriage, man and woman, and you're just inundated. I'm aging myself because that's all it was on TV. These today, now you're like, wow, Will and Grace was progressive for me. But you have this idea of who you are until you hit puberty and you realize who you're not. So in a sense, then all of a sudden your entire life of how you portrayed it, how you saw it, what you imagined and envisioned, you realize is completely false. In a sense, that vision, that version of yourself, I remember in my own experience, it was a sense of dying because I had the whole vision of what it was, but being Hispanic, being the first male grandchild, which there's culture and stigma and shame within that, wanting to suicide was really high thought. The idea of coming out, the idea of being judged, all of these things that we're experiencing, I realized in high school, a lot of my other counterparts who weren't having those same experiences, they weren't even thinking about what the idea of is. I thought it might be a little different. It was just, they were completely in their own space. So I think to answer your question, yeah, there's a lot of different intersectionalities when it's coming to religion, it's coming to culture, it's coming to the concept of sexual identity. And when all of these things are realized to a person, that is really effective if they're not in a supportive and loving and caring environment, or if they're even safe and secure within themselves, because that's still a process and learning that person has to go through by themselves, in a sense.
Well, thanks. Because when I see somebody who comes in who's from a minority and has a mental illness, a lot of times they have preconceived notions, or their family has preconceived notions on what it's like, or is it allowable. And lately I've had visitation from a few people from the African community, from Kenya and different countries, and they believe basically that mental health is witchcraft. And so they don't want to go to a doctor or let someone know that they're getting therapy or whatever. So I'm looking at taking that and adding on somebody who is gay or who's trans and who's having to deal with the add-ons. And then we have the COVID, and then we have the riots. or you know, on the marches and things. And, you know, there's just so much going on in the world today. It's not one single thing. So when you go in to therapy, it's like the poor therapist is going to get pounded on with a bunch of rocks because you have so much to let go.
Right, you have to start to unpack that in a sense. And people of color, I've had clients come in where being gay or living with HIV was actually, having mental health was actually worse than those two.
Right.
They couldn't, the concept, and they've always, this is the word, I'm not crazy. So a lot of times people of color don't seek help. And when they finally do, it's reaching that point where either they've been forced to, or there's just no other way out, or they finally come to terms like, I can't do this alone.
Naomi, please unmute yourself, dear.
Yeah, no, I wanted to jump in. That is a great point, because there is a huge amount of stigma associated with mental health or going to see a doctor or different things like that when you are in the Black community especially, but the community of color specifically. And I'll be honest, even in 2017, I battled with depression, and my doctor diagnosed me with depression acute, you know, which is circumstantial and it's situational, and it's not chemical depression, so it's different. But even I at that time did not understand it. So when I called my mother and I started to tell her, you know, I'm like, am I crazy? You know, I mean, that's the first thing that popped in my mind. But no, I'm normal. You know, I'm normal because I have issues that I deal with, and I have struggles, and I have, you know, things that can depress me. You know, that makes me normal. That doesn't make me crazy. And actually talking to my doctor about it was a normal and a healthy decision versus not seeking the help that I truly need. And, you know, when it comes to especially the Black community, and really the Black and brown with Hispanic community as well, you know, I think that there's an even bigger level of stigma when you compare that to some of our white counterparts in the communities, because the level of acceptance is even lower, you know, when you talk about communities of color, especially because they're more familial. You know, they're more family oriented. And a lot of the times when you come out as gay, or especially trans, you're isolated and sometimes secluded from the community and from the family. And that adds to the depression because, you know, growing up, sometimes all you feel that you have is your family. And so for you to be separated from the family, that leads to, you know, mental health issues. That leads to people being forced into, you know, survival sex work and, you know, different things like that, which is why people in the trans community, and specifically the trans community of color, are adversely impacted by HIV or disproportionately impacted by HIV, as well as, you know, things like depression and suicide and a lot of those things as well. So the level of privilege, because some people don't realize having your family is a privilege, especially when you come out as gay or when you come out as trans or anything that is a part of the Pride community. Continuing to have that family support is a privilege. And a lot of people in the Black and brown community of the Pride community don't have that privilege once they come out as being gay or trans. And like I said, trans is even worse because there are a lot of people in our community, in the Black community, who feel like, oh, I would rather my son come to me and tell me that he is gay versus coming to tell me that he wants to be a woman. You know, there's even more stigma and shame on transitioning. And you know what some people don't realize is sometimes we have to make the difficult decision, or, you know, we have to come out twice. You know, I had to first come out to my mother and let her know, you know, at 16 or 17 or 18 years old that, yes, you know, I'm a gay man, you know, because at that time, that's all I could really say. I didn't know what trans was. I know what I felt like. I know who I was on the inside. I know who I was, but I didn't know what trans was. I just knew that I liked men and that I was different and that, I wasn't like, everyone else in the cisgender heterosexual community, and then after college is when, I found out what trans was, and that's when I knew, yeah, because I always knew growing up that I was going to be a woman. I didn't know how. I didn't know anything about hormones. I didn't know anything about sexual assignment resurgery. I thought that I was going to go to sleep and wake up and God was going to make me a woman one day. That is what I believed. So I had to come out twice. Once I started to find out how to be trans and how to make my transition and, make my affirming journey and becoming who I am today and who you see today, I have to come out to my mother again and say, look, this is who I am. This is who I am going to be. This is what I am going to look like. So, it was something that I had to do twice, which is even harder, for some people, because that first time, it can be the difference between life and death sometimes. So, yeah, I definitely think that, and to Al's point, going down Cedar Springs and things like that, sometimes we don't feel as welcoming or as welcome. I mean, I went out to an event this weekend and I'm looking around and I saw nothing but gay men. I felt out of place, somewhere that was supposed to be like a pride event. And I'm looking around and I was like the only trans woman there. So, we definitely have a ways to go. But I think one of the hardest things about being trans is also you don't see as many people like you. And you find yourself, being alone and being the only one, depending on where you live and the groups that you hang in. And so that can be even more difficult to always feel like you're by yourself. And every fight that you have, you're in it by yourself and you're the only one that has your back because, you don't have anyone else that you can look at and identify like you.
That's true. I'm gonna switch gears here a little bit and bring up the recent Supreme Court rulings. Sharyn, do you want to talk about that right now and how you think that affects the Pride community? Do you want to unmute yourself, please, dear?
As far as, go a little bit more specific.
How do you think that the Supreme Court ruling affects the community?
The Supreme Court ruling on work, the latest work.
Yes.
How does it affect the Pride community? Well, I know there was a lot of celebrating going on with regard to the ruling for non-discrimination situations where people won't be discriminated against in the workplace. My answer, is yay. That was a celebration day for a victory in our country. I was actually pretty blown away as an ally who supports non-discrimination at work that actually happened during this particular time in our lives with what's happening with our election in November. I was like, had it not been COVID, I don't like COVID, but had it not been COVID, I'm not so sure something like that would have actually happened. I was shocked and grateful to be able to celebrate with my Pride friends that this piece of fairness was finally activated. So my response is a celebration for the Pride community.
Now, Allison, I want to turn to you because I want to ask you this. What do you think it really means that the Supreme Court came down with this? How does it really affect people?
I think that's an interesting question because, those of us who are in the community and are very aware of the fact that we could have at any moment been fired for being a member of the LGBTQ community and have been following the Supreme Court case for back when they were talking about it in 2019 and waiting the past 6 months to find out what the decision was going to be. First, before I answer that specific part of the question, John, I think an interesting thing to remember, as well as a celebration, it's also a reminder of how far behind we are and how far forward we still have to go. To be at this point and to be talking about whether or not it should be legal to fire someone just because of their sexual orientation or gender identity is I mean, it's crazy, and so when these victories happen, it is also within the community a day of celebration, but also a gut-wrenching reminder of really where we're at. So I will be my personal perspective on that. But as far as what does it really mean, I think it's important to understand the concept of what is called second generation bias, which is the phenomenon that happens after a policy changes and then while society is then catching up to what happens, right? So just because a policy changes and says you can no longer legally fire somebody just because they are transgender or just because they're gay, that doesn't mean that workplace discrimination has stopped. It doesn't change the microaggressions from the person in the cubicle next to you. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden your workplace is going to understand gender identity and know how to implement the right policies and procedures to where your gender is being affirmed throughout, your day-to-day practices at work. There's a long way to go to actually get past day-to-day discrimination. But what it does look like, fortunately, is that there's been a long-standing, adage in the LGBT community following same-sex marriage being passed that you could get married today. You can get married on Friday and fired on Monday, right? Because you get married legally, and then the next day you put a picture of you and your same-sex partner on your desk, and you can legally be fired because of that. So we will no longer be throwing that adage out there. We can no longer just be fired because of that. But we have a long way to go to make sure that actual discrimination within the workplace is not happening.
One thing I do want to add about that is, and I'll bring it back again, is training people to have an understanding of who you're working with, who you're living with, and the respect that goes along with, you may not like it, but you're all in the same pool together. We need to learn what each other's needs and wants and desires are so that we can be a cohesive society. And I'm hoping that this ruling will help educate and train people. That's really what we need to do. I've met more allies who have said the wrong thing to people in the trans community because they don't understand, which is why we like to hold events where people can ask questions and be honest and understand without judgment and objectivity. So I think that if we now have this established where we have this ruling, we need to really go in and have understanding and teach compassion to work together. We are missing that part.
Thank you. Raymond, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
Absolutely. Everyone made amazing comments, and definitely I agree. For me, in a time where there's been so much heaviness, and with this administration, even with the Pride community, a lot of fear, to have a victory, even there's a lot of work to be done. But to me, that was a good thing. We talk about people have different experiences, and a lot of people really go through a really hard time just to come out, live authentic, and then land their dream job and have to go back into the closet. And so this really is an opportunity for us. We have a lot of work to do but it's letting us know that the culture and the mindset, people are waking up, it's shifting, and it's shifting enough to say, okay, you can't discriminate against the Pride community, which I know wow, we're there, but we are here because we weren't there before. And in this circumstances, in this administration, in this context of the field that we're at, this still happened. To me, it personally just gave me a little bit of hope back. Yeah.
Naomi, what about you? I know we had this great event, and then we had the military ruling. And so that kind of when it crossways at each other?
Yeah, I mean, you had the, the executive order, with dealing with the healthcare and not being protected, and then you had the Supreme Court ruling, and then you had the military. So, it just seems like there's constantly something. It was something to smile about, and to feel good about in a moment where things did not feel so good. It was almost just a silver lining, I guess is what I'll say. And being someone who transitioned at work, I started my job as male and, transitioned at my job. I was blessed and lucky and privileged enough to have a company that I worked for that was supportive, and who was affirming and who allowed me to do that. But I also had to get my affairs in order. And for many trans people, depending on where you live and what state you live in and things like that, it can be very difficult to have documents change, like your gender markings, your name changes, and different things like that. It can be a very hard process depending on where you live. And so for some trans people, it's not easy to get that done, and it leaves you open to discrimination in the workplace. Even though I show up looking like Naomi, at my interview, and then they hire me and everything's good, and then I come to orientation and I have to take my driver's license and my birth certificate that still have my dead name and still have my gender as male and things like that. There have been times where trans people at that point have been denied a job, because of just that. So now just to at least have that, knowing that, okay, we're good either way, in the workplace is good, because in my opinion, employment is a health issue. It is, because you need employment to live. You need employment to be able to have health care, to be able to pay for doctor's visits, to be able to pay for medicine, to be able to transition, to be able to eat and things like that, which all go into your health and your mental health. That is a health issue. So to be denied a right to be able to work, to make a living for yourself and be able to take care of you inside and outside is definitely a health issue for me. So it was a milestone, but again, a huge sobering reminder of the times that we live in, where this is even something that we still have to celebrate, because, up to this point, you were able to still be fired and discriminated against just for being a part of the Pride community. So like they said, I mean, it's very still sobering. 1 minute it's like I'm happy, but then it's like, man, I can't believe I even have to be happy about this and cheer about this, because this is still even an issue.
And I guess, gosh, having to deal with you not matching your driver's license, the only thing I came close to was when they took a picture of me with my eyes closed, and we wrote a check, and I gave them my driver's license, and the person had my check and my driver's license and looked at me funny. So I quickly closed my eyes and said, "Does that look like me?" But that's as close as I can get to that. So I've been very fortunate not having to deal with that kind of, over discrimination. But, we live in such a macho state that stigma runs rampant right now about everything. And I'm just wondering, do any of y'all see any end to that as far as our conversations the last few weeks about race? Are they going to help us with the Pride situation? And are they going to help us overall with stigma, or are they just going to sit and say, okay, it's okay to be Black, it's okay to be Hispanic or whatever, but then the gays, they're different? Do y'all see any hope?
So as it pertains to the race conversation and all the protests and things like that are going on right now, I don't see that having any sort of impact on where we are as a pride community, specifically in the Black community. I mean, there was, within a week of the George Floyd video and the protest starting and things like that, right in Minneapolis, a video surfaced of a trans woman of color being attacked by a mob of Black men and women. And then when we started to talk about it, people got upset. You know, when we start to say that Black trans lives matter and Black LGBT lives matter and all Black lives matter, Black people got upset. Don't take the tension away from Black lives matter right now. We can deal with that later. So you want us to don't talk about that right here, right now in this form. Okay, so the video was not made by this trans woman. The video was made by one of the Black men that was in the crowd watching this woman get beat by all these people. So we didn't bring it here. And all we're doing is talking about something that has already been put there. So what are we doing wrong other than having a conversation about something to say, hey, how can we talk about Black Lives Matter when we got Black people beating up on a Black trans woman like her life does not matter? You know, and I had to tell people, before an investor buys into a corporation, they want to make sure that that corporation's affairs and house is in order. And what we're ultimately doing is we're asking people outside of the Black community to invest in us, to change their minds, to change their perceptions, to change their hearts, to change their attitudes, and to change their the way that they act and treat Black people. We're asking them to invest in us. And if we're still beating on each other because someone is trans or just because someone is different, then what do you think the people on the outside from these other communities, these people that we're trying to get to invest in us, what do you think they're going to see and feel when they see that? So no, we need to work on our house at the same time as we're trying to get people outside of our house to invest in us. We need to be on a solid foundation. And so, and a lot of people just do not get that. And there has been so much backlash from so many Black people, cisgender, heterosexual Black people, who feel like now is not the time to be talking about Black trans lives matter and all Black lives matter. Let's talk about just Black lives right now, and then we can focus on that later. When another 100 trans people are dead, you know, is that going to be the appropriate time? Like, who are you to say when the appropriate time? We're reacting to something that just happened now, you know? So you want us to not talk about this woman that was beat because you have a problem with us saying that Black trans lives matter because we're Black too? You know, so I definitely do not see hope in it. I think that we have a long way to go. I am proud to see Black people standing together, you know, in unison, and trying to actually use our voices and the power that we have in our spending dollar and things like that to make a change for Black people. But we still need Black people to realize that trans people and LGBTQ people are Black as well. And I really don't see how some of these people, after all of the years of injustice, of, you know, racism that we've experienced and everything else that we have been dealt, I just cannot fathom how some of these people are able to continue to pass that along to someone else, because the same way that they are looking at us as a community is the same way that white people looked at Black people. They thought that we were less than human. They used the Bible and everything else to justify some of their actions. We were beneath them, and they felt justified in treating us the way that they did. And now, as Black people, we have all these rights, and we're passing that on to people in our own community. And that just does not make any sense to me. And you would think that we would have a lot more compassion and empathy for another marginalized group of people. And like I had to tell some people on a call one day, we need to stand together. Black people didn't get the right to vote, and women didn't get the right to vote on their own. It happened because they put that on the same bill And they were able to get those people to come together to have that amendment changed. But they had to do it together because women weren't going to get the right on their own and Black people were not going to get the right on their own. You know, but together they had a bigger voice, they had a bigger impact, and they were able to get that amendment changed. And now we all have the right to vote. And I truly feel like Black people need to do the same thing with the Pride community. Join hands with the Pride community. If we really want to have progress, we need to join hands because we'll have a bigger voice and we can have a bigger impact. That's, I mean, honestly, that's what I see. But right now, I don't see hope because so many people are afraid to even have the conversation, you know, because of the level of stigma. So many people don't even want to talk about it because they feel like it's going to make them gay or it's going to, people are going to think that they're one of us just for realizing that we're human and treating us like humans, you know, and so many feel like they have to overcompensate for their masculinity. And then that's when they start to verbally or physically abuse people of the Pride community just to seem as far away from it as possible. And that is ridiculous to me. So of all communities, I truly feel like, and maybe it's because I am Black, but I feel like the Black community has the furthest way to go. And maybe it's because of the old saying, hurt people, hurt people. And because of the level of historic trauma that we have and trauma that we still experience to this day, and because of the hurt that many of us are walking around feeling, we just have no regard for the hurt that we're passing on to someone else. Or we don't care, or it makes us feel better about what we're dealing with. I don't know what it is, but I feel like we have leaps and bounds to go.
You're right. And now, Allison, I want to hit you with a positive, though, because Dwayne Wade has come out as being like 100% supportive of his trans daughter and went to an event with her and, you know, shut everybody down and no one, you know, better say anything or they got him to come to and all. And how can we use someone like him as the poster child to counteract all the crap that's going on?
Wow. You know, that's interesting. I have I've obviously been following that young woman's story. And it's great to see a young girl being supported by her father and her family in general. But, you know, it's interesting that I haven't thought of how to use that as a poster child because I'm seeing this from the perspective of the kids in everyday. I want to answer your question, but you're throwing something at me that I haven't yet considered. And let me just walk you through my thought process because maybe that'll help me get there. Regardless of what stories come out with celebrities, right? The big deal celebrity stories. I'm still working with these youth every single day whose parents are not accepting, who don't understand what's going on. The kids don't even know how to talk to their parents about these issues. I guess in that regard, they can show, they can say, hey mom, watch this interview with my favorite basketball player and let's talk about it. Now mom and dad are sitting down, they can watch this story and then the kid can say, I'm just like this. And then that opens up the conversation and we can start having parents have, you know, it's a way, representation always gives people in the community, whatever community is being represented, a way to say, hey, I'm just like that, or if you don't understand me, maybe you'll understand this, because a parent can be separated from the emotional connection if they're watching an interview on TV and then apply it back to their kiddo, rather than that kid having to come and bring it to the table first. This story about this young woman has been out for a little while now, and I haven't seen a big eruption of support within the parents of the LGBTQ youth community. But maybe you're right. Maybe we should focus a little bit more on sharing those stories just for the sake of having representation disseminated that way.
Yeah, I'm just looking at here this macho athlete who's admired by all these people, and he's this sweet, kind dad, you know, and that other people can be the same, no matter what color they are, that they can have that same relationship, whether it's a daughter who's came into this world as my daughter or who's now in this world as my daughter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think, and I agree with you. I want to be, I'm positive with you, John. I think that's a great positive thing. And then it can open up the conversation for what comes next, because there's a lot more than just accepting. It looks so easy in a video, and it should be easy to say, my daughter came to me with this. She told me who she is. We love her, and we're always going to support her. But from working directly with the parents, I have to facilitate a support group for parents of transgender and gender nonconforming teens. And so I'm working with those parents very closely, and it's not, there's a lot that goes into it, rather than just hearing, listening, and acting. So I think that you're right. We can see those stories, and then we can start the conversation of, okay, what is it really going to look like? And when your kiddo comes to you with this news, how can you actually respond in a way that is affirming and learn how to advocate for them and learn how to help them navigate the world moving forward? It's definitely a conversation starter.
Raymond, did you have anything to add to that? Or?
The only thing I can add to that is Dwayne Wade, a basketball player. You know, he's definitely talking to a culture that's already hard to even talk about this with. And so, you know, a lot of people look up to him, and as if other people are faced or in the same situation, maybe this is something they can draw on if that's one of their heroes, and it can open the conversation in that aspect, because, you know, in the field, he's a hero to a lot of people and a lot of young people. So hopefully it starts the conversation.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that people look at it and go, wow, if Dwayne Wade's daughter is like this, then what's the big deal about us having a daughter just like that? I know people don't look at it when it's their kid, but it would be nice if that's the way we envisioned it, that it was just the way it is.
Absolutely. And I think just to make a quick little note about that and representation, we talk about how important it is to see them in these big media stories, but that representation and inclusivity and affirmation is so important in day-to-day conversation. So I think that an important and takeaway from all of this, when we're talking about the mental health community or in schools or in community programs and how to be safe and how to be affirming, is that it's a lot more effective to be proactive than to be reactionary. So like when Sharyn had talked about implementing these trainings, which are so, she's seeing all, you know, great success in implementing these dynamic trainings that are helping people. Those things come first. They don't come when you're an employer or you're a mental health organization and you see, oh, the first time a trans patient walks in the door, and now all of a sudden we have to react and learn how to accommodate this situation, or the first time that you have an employee who comes out as trans, and now you have to look towards the HR department to see what do we do here. All of these things should be a part of our normal everyday conversation. When you're in the break room and you're asking people about their spouse, understand that they could have a spouse of any gender and not just automatically ask about their husband, right? Like, or their wife. Just thinking about how you use your language in everyday conversation, create safe spaces for conversation. And the same way with gendered language and pronouns, HR policies, forms that you fill out when you check yourself into a mental health for your appointment or a mental health hospital. When you have to click the gender box, does it only say male and female? Do you have a place to write in a preferred name? If you're required to say your legal name, can you make it is there a place to explain, this is the name that I should be called and only this name? Will that be translated to your hospital band? All of these things are important to do as just normal part of the culture, and not just in a reactionary sense.
Now we're going to wrap it up now. Sharyn, did you want to say anything, any final words of wisdom?
Well, yeah, I do want to share about the long road and the long journey that we have ahead of us to teach people. Again, I'll keep going back to this. The only way that we're going to be able to be effective is to actually just go in and make these opportunities for people to learn to become a policy inside of businesses. You're right, reactionary. how do you react when somebody is entering into a situation that they're totally unfamiliar with? You're going to lose that person. They're never walking in the door again, and then we're walking into mental health issues. So it is the reason why I will die saying working together on teaching people what the cultural competencies are that are necessary for all people to feel good, healthy, strong, and loved is where we need to be going. Right now we have an open door. So it needs to be a goal to educate people and so that they have a better understanding. People don't get it. I cannot tell you how many conversations with trans people on our board that have I have walked into living communities and said, I don't feel comfortable here. I can't never consider living here. Well, of course you can't, because nobody understands. So it's really our duty and obligation to help people learn and take away stigma, fear, and judgment so that we can move forward. There are good things that are happening. Sadly, Stonewall happened a long time. We haven't really progressed very far, but to me, this is one of the greatest progressions that we have. We need to hang on to it and move with it. And take advantage of the situation that the door is open right now. We got to walk in and working together.
And Naomi, do you want to say the final word for us today? You can't talk because you're muted, my dear.
I'm sorry, I was sending my information to someone who asked, but no, I would just like to say, be as inclusive as possible. Don't forget about your trans sisters and brothers when making some of these policies, decisions. And if you really want to be inclusive, always have someone of trans experience a part of the decision making. Looking over your policies, looking over your forms, looking over your documents and things like that to make sure that they are going to be as trans friendly and inclusive and affirming as possible. And I just really am thankful that you guys did this. And I think that it's a huge step forward in continuing the conversation and, decreasing stigma. And as it pertains to Dwayne Wade, baby, listen, I am so excited that he is publicly supporting his daughter and her transition and her affirmation journey. And I think that if we can see a man in the NBA who has millions of eyes staring at him all the time, stand up to society and fight back against shame and stigma and all the things that people have to say about him being a dad and allowing his child to make such a huge decision at such an early age and be able to deal with that and stick to his guns. I think that it is a huge example for any other parent in any other community who has hundreds of people who's looking at them and they're worried about what people are going to say about him. If this man has millions of eyes on him and millions of people trying to judge him and he is still saying, look, this is my daughter, this is my child, I support her regardless, to me, that speaks volumes. And so I am extremely proud and happy about it. Thankful for all of you guys. I know I can be long-winded and I'm sorry, but I'm just passionate about this. And just remember, mental health is very, very important. And just make sure that if any mental health providers are on here, make sure that you have trans people working at your organization, because sometimes it's best for us to be able to sit down and talk to our problems and our issues with people who look like us or who have our journey and who have our thoughts and who have been through some of our experiences to really be able to understand what it is that we're going to, and also for us to be able to have that trust in them that they really get us and that they're giving us trusted and valuable insight and information and feedback based on whatever we're talking about. But thank you guys so much. I really appreciate this.
Naomi, Raymond, Allison, Sharyn, thank you so much for making this a great conversation. And thank you, audience, for listening to us. And if you want to contact any of these folks, I'm sure they'd be happy for me to give their email addresses out in the future. So you can just contact me at johnd@naminorthtexas.org. And I thank you all for being here and have a lovely Wednesday night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. It's great talking with all of you.
Thank
Thank you, everyone. Take care.